Aliens were shocked to find humans thriving on the galaxy's deadliest planet. Part 1. Voskareth had been wrong exactly once in 300 years. He was about to make it twice. He sat in the observation deck of the survey vessel Unbroken Record, surrounded by screens, star maps, and the soft hum of deep-range sensors doing their quiet, patient work. The ship was parked at the edge of the Vorith Nebula, not a dramatic location, not a dangerous one. Just the outer fringe of catalogued space where old data got reviewed and filed and forgotten. Routine work. The kind that kept junior crew employed and senior crew sane. Kale 9 was on his list. It was always on somebody's list, just never for long. The planet sat at coordinates that made navigators uncomfortable, not because it was hard to reach, but because everything that reached it tended to stay there permanently, in pieces. The cooperative had lost 3 full survey fleets to Kale 9 over the course of 200 years. The last attempt was in the year 1842 by cooperative standard. They sent 12 ships. 3 came back. The ones that came back had nothing useful to report except that the atmosphere was worse than the models predicted and the ground fauna were worse than the atmosphere. After that, the cooperative marked Kale 9 as Category Omega and moved on. Category Omega meant unsurvivable. It meant no further investment. It meant the planet got a file number, a warning beacon, and a permanent spot on the list of places that existed but didn't matter. Voskareth was reviewing that file now. Standard archival work. He was confirming old data, cross-checking beacon signals, making sure the automated warning system was still broadcasting. The beacon was fine. There was also something else broadcasting. He noticed it the way you notice a sound in a quiet house, not loud, not alarming, just wrong. A structured energy signature coming from the planet's surface. Organized pulses. Repeated intervals. The pattern of something built, not something natural. He ran the scan again. Same result. He ran it a third time, adjusting the calibration, assuming instrument drift. The ship was old. Sensors degraded. This was the most reasonable explanation. The sensors were fine. The signature was real, and it was moving. Seath, his junior crew member, a young Ithali with pale gray skin and 3 sets of eyelids that blinked in sequence when he was thinking hard, leaned over from the adjacent station. The movement pattern is consistent with vehicles, Seath said. Or organisms carrying technology. The thermal output is too even for wildlife. File a maintenance report, Voskareth said. Something is wrong with the array. I already ran diagnostics. The array is functioning normally. Voskareth stared at the screen for a long moment. On it, the energy signatures pulsed. Steady. Certain. Coming from a planet where nothing was supposed to be certain except death. He filed the report to the Cooperative Council anyway. He flagged it as a probable sensor anomaly, recommended a secondary check from a closer vessel, and attached the raw data without comment. Then he made himself a cup of heated grain water and sat back and did not sleep, because something in the base of his ancient brain was telling him that the anomaly was not an anomaly at all. The council responded in 6 hours. That was fast. For the Cooperative Council, 6 hours was practically a sprint. They called an emergency session. Voskareth attended via comm link and watched 17 senior representatives from 12 species talk over each other in 4 languages simultaneously. The translation matrix struggled. The core argument was simple: the data was impossible, therefore the data was wrong, therefore no action was required. This was the position of the majority. It was a comfortable position. Voskareth had held it himself for approximately 4 hours before the third diagnostic came back clean. The minority position, held by 3 representatives including a very old Dorhai woman named Esthale who had outlived 2 previous council structures, was that impossible data still required investigation. While they argued, Voskareth authorized the launch of 3 long-range drones toward Kale 9. The drones entered the upper atmosphere and began their descent. The planet looked the way it always looked in footage, brown and orange and angry, cloud cover thick enough to block most visible light, lightning threading through the upper layers in constant pale flashes. The kind of planet that looked like it was in the middle of being born and had decided it didn't want to be. The first drone was destroyed at 11 minutes, 30 seconds. Impact with atmospheric debris, most likely. The second drone lasted 19 minutes before its signal went dark. The third drone descended lower than the others, below the cloud ceiling, and managed to transmit 4 seconds of surface footage before it was hit by something moving very fast from below. Something that was fired. Not thrown. Not launched by natural force. Fired. Deliberately. From the ground. Seath pulled up the 4 seconds of footage and they watched it together in silence. Brown ground. Dark structures. Lights. And in the last frame before the signal cut, something tall, angular, built, unmistakably built, with lights in its windows and smoke rising from vents in its sides. A city. On Kale 9. The council was still arguing when the transmission came in. It arrived on the standard open hailing frequency, the one the cooperative used for first contact protocols, the one that any sufficiently advanced species theoretically knew to monitor. The voice was low and unhurried and spoke in Galactic standard with an accent that the translation matrix flagged as unknown origin. Whoever's pinging our airspace, identify yourself or we'll keep shooting. Not a greeting. Not a plea. A policy statement. Voskareth stared at the comm panel. In 300 years he had made first contact with 7 species. He had reviewed the contact files of 40 more. He had read every known protocol for encountering new civilizations. Not one of those protocols covered the situation where the new civilization was already annoyed at you. Seath blinked all 3 sets of eyelids in rapid sequence. Should I respond? Seath asked. Voskareth was already reaching for the comm. Yes, he said. Carefully. He introduced himself. His name, his rank, his vessel, his purpose. Routine work. Archival review. No hostile intent. He apologized for the drones. He did not explain why he had sent them, because the honest answer, that their city should not exist, seemed like a poor way to begin a conversation. The voice on the other end was quiet for a moment. Then, you're from the cooperative? Yes. Another pause. We figured someone would show up eventually. A sound in the background, human voices talking, someone laughing at something. Stand by. The channel went quiet. Not dead, the connection held. He could hear the ambient sound of wherever the voice was speaking from, a room full of activity, machinery somewhere below, wind, the deep low rumble of something that might have been thunder. A planet that killed 12 ships was rumbling quietly in the background of a phone call. Voskareth requested permission from the council to make direct contact. 17 of the 20 members were in favor of quarantining the entire system and pretending the footage didn't exist. He filed the override. It was the second time in 300 years he'd done that. He didn't wait for their response. He was already plotting a course toward Kale 9 when Seath asked him, very quietly, what he thought they were going to find down there. Voskareth looked at the 4 seconds of footage again. The city. The lights. The smoke rising from vents in the walls of buildings that should not be standing on a planet that should not be holding anything alive. I have no idea, he said. He said it like it was a problem. It was actually the most interesting thing that had happened to him in 100 years. Aliens were shocked to find humans thriving on the galaxy's deadliest planet. Part 2. Cole Rydell was 400 meters underground when his comm went off. He was in Shaft 7, a geothermal access tunnel that ran straight down into the hot belly of the caldera below Rydell Ridge. The walls were dark basalt, slick with condensation. The air smelled like iron and heat. Cole had a sample drill in one hand and a thermos of bad coffee in the other, and he was in the middle of something important, which was deciding whether the left wall of the shaft showed stress fractures or just normal compression marks. His comm buzzed a second time. He checked it without putting down the drill. The message was from Pete Harlow, the colony's chief engineer, and it said, "Alien ship in orbit. Council wants you topside. Now." Cole looked at the wall for another 3 seconds. Stress fractures, he decided. He'd send a crew down to reinforce in the morning. He took the lift up. Rydell Ridge sat inside the collapsed rim of a dormant volcano, which made it sound dramatic and was actually the most practical building decision the first colonists had made. The caldera walls blocked wind. The geothermal activity below provided heat and power. The shape of the rim created a natural weather shadow during the worst of the lightning seasons. When people on other worlds heard that the colony was built inside a volcano, they usually assumed it was a desperate choice. It was actually the safest spot on the entire planet. The city had grown in rings out from the central heat vents. Closest to the vents, the industrial buildings, the greenhouses, the power infrastructure. Further out, housing, the school, the medical center, the archive hall where 80 years of colony records were kept in fireproof cases. The buildings were low and wide, with thick walls and no sharp corners. The original architects had spent 6 months studying how Kale-9's fauna moved and built accordingly. Angular structures attracted attention. Rounded ones didn't. After 3 generations, nobody thought about it anymore. It was just how buildings looked. Pete Harlow was waiting at the surface lift when Cole came up. Pete was in his mid-50s, built like someone who had personally carried heavy things for most of his life, which he had. He had a thick gray beard and the permanent squint of a man who had spent decades looking at things and deciding if they were going to fall on him. "Big ship," Pete said. "How big?" "Big enough that our perimeter guns gave it a full hello before we told them to stand down." He handed Cole a printed communication log. Cole read it while walking. "They sent drones first. We shot those." "Good. Then they hailed us on the open channel." "What language?" "Galactic Standard. Decent accent. Whoever they sent speaks it well." Pete fell into step beside him. "Council's talking about rolling out the formal welcome protocol." "The one from the charter?" Cole looked up from the log. "We have a formal welcome protocol. We wrote one. Year 6. After the cooperative beacon situation. Nobody ever used it. Nobody ever showed up." Pete shrugged. "Dana's already at the landing pad. She volunteered to meet them first." Cole handed the log back. "Of course she did. Dana Vaught had come to Kale-9 8 years ago from a research post on Callisto, which was considered a rough assignment by most xenobiologists and had taken her approximately 11 days to find boring. She had applied for Kale-9 transfer on a Tuesday and been on a ship by Friday. She was the kind of person who read Kale-9's atmospheric composition data the way other people read travel brochures. She had never once described the planet as dangerous, which was either a sign of deep professional respect for it or a particular gap in her self-preservation instincts. Cole had not yet decided which. The cooperative shuttle came down in the flat area outside the eastern gate at mid-morning, during the calm window between the overnight lightning cycle and the afternoon pressure shift. Good timing. Either they'd done their research or they'd gotten lucky. Dana was standing on the landing pad in a jacket and work boots, her dark hair pinned back, holding a tablet she didn't need and a cup of tea she did. The shuttle's door opened. Voskareth stepped out in a full hazard suit. The suit was rated for Kale-9 conditions. Cole could see the pressure seals along the joints, the filter array on the chest, the optical enhancers over the eye panels. It was good equipment. Expensive. The kind of gear the cooperative reserved for genuinely hostile environments. Dana was wearing a jacket. She extended her hand. Voskareth looked at the hand, then at her jacket, then at the sky, where the clouds were doing the slow gray churn they did before an afternoon buildup. His translator was running. Cole could see the interface light on the suit's collar. "You are not in protective equipment," Voskareth said. "I have a jacket," Dana said. "The atmospheric particulate level is." "Yeah, you get used to it." She shook his hand, which he allowed with the careful stiffness of someone doing something new. "Welcome to Rydell Ridge. Come on, I'll show you around before the pressure shifts." What followed was 3 hours that Voskareth would later describe in his official report as the most cognitively demanding field observation of my career, which was saying something for a being who had lived 3 centuries. Dana walked him through the colony with the easy pace of someone who lived there, pointing out buildings and systems and explaining decisions the way you explain things that are obvious to you and have simply never occurred to anyone else. The geothermal grid. The air cycling system, which filtered the sulfur content down to breathable levels inside the city while leaving the exterior at natural levels because building a sealed dome at this scale was, as Pete had once put it, more trouble than just adjusting. The greenhouse rings, where food was grown in soil that had been chemically treated and then retreated and then treated again over 30 years until it stopped trying to eat the roots. Voskareth kept asking how. How was this built? How does this function? How do you tolerate the pressure variations? Pete, who joined them for the engineering portion, answered each question with some version of, "We figured it out, and it wasn't that complicated once you understood what the planet was doing." His translator kept flagging these answers as incomplete. They were not incomplete. They were just missing the part where most species would have stopped. Voskareth asked, carefully, how many people had died during the construction of the colony. Pete pulled a small ledger from his shirt pocket. It was old, the cover worn soft, the pages inside covered in handwriting that had been added to over decades by different hands. He opened it to the first page and read the names. All of them. 31 names, with dates and a single line about each person, what they were doing, what went wrong. He read them without ceremony, in the same tone he used for engineering specs. When he was done, he put the ledger back in his pocket. 31, Voskareth said. In 80 years, Pete said. First 20 years were the hardest. After that we'd figured out most of the patterns. Voskareth was quiet for a moment. He did not say that the cooperative had lost 3,000 beings in 3 survey attempts totaling less than 2 weeks on the same planet. He added the number to his notes. It sat there in his report like a wrong answer on a math test that he couldn't find the error in. By the time they reached the archive hall, the afternoon pressure shift had started, a low, steady drop that most of the colony didn't notice anymore but that made Voskareth's suit automatically tighten its pressure seals. He watched children cross the open courtyard without breaking stride. A group of older residents sat outside a building in chairs, talking, unbothered. Cole, walking beside him now, said nothing. He was watching Voskareth the way he watched geological formations, looking for where the stress was building. They are not afraid, Voskareth said finally. Of what? Voskareth gestured at all of it. The sky. The ground. The planet. Cole thought about it for a second. I mean, he said, what would be the point? That night, alone in the visitor quarters the colony had set up in the archive building, Voskareth began his preliminary report. He wrote for 2 hours. He deleted most of it. He started again. His summary line, at the end of his 3rd attempt, read, I do not have a category for them. He sent it anyway. The council would want context. He would provide it when he had it. He didn't have it yet. He was beginning to suspect he might never fully have it. Outside, the evening lightning cycle began. Through the thick window of the archive hall, Voskareth watched the sky flash white and purple over the caldera rim. Violent. Regular. Beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they should be killing you and aren't. He watched it for a long time. Nobody came to close the shutters. Nobody seemed worried. Somewhere down the corridor, he could hear 2 people laughing about something. He added that to his notes 2 aliens were shocked to find humans thriving on the galaxy's deadliest planet. Part 3. Voskareth spent 3 days in the archive hall and came out with a list of 47 questions. He had narrowed it down from 200. The original list had included things like why and how is this possible and what is wrong with you, but those were not scientific questions and he was, above all things, a scientist. So he reduced. He filtered. He kept only the questions that had answers he could write down and file with the council. Cole Rydell agreed to answer them. He made this clear by showing up to the archive hall on the 4th morning with 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one for Voskareth, who could not drink it due to incompatible biology but accepted it anyway because Cole had brought it and Cole did not seem like someone who brought things twice. They sat across a table in the hall's reading room. Old maps covered the walls, hand-drawn surveys from the colony's first decade, updated and redrawn as understanding grew. The room smelled like paper and machine oil and the particular dry warmth that geothermal heating produced. Voskareth opened his notes. Cole watched him the way he watched his instruments, without impatience, without expectation, just steady attention. The first question was about biology. Voskareth had reviewed the cooperative's atmospheric toxicology models for Kale 9. By those models, sustained exposure to the exterior atmosphere, even with the colony's internal filtration, should produce measurable degradation in human respiratory tissue over a period of 2 to 3 years. He had reviewed the colony's medical records, which Dana had shared. No such degradation appeared. He wanted to know why. Cole thought about it. The first generation used full suits outside, he said. The second generation used partial suits, filtered helmets, that's it. My generation, we use jackets in storm season. The medical models. The medical models were built on short-term exposure data. Nobody stayed long enough to generate long-term data. Voskareth wrote this down. So the body adapted. The body always adapts, Cole said. You just have to give it enough time and not die in the meantime. This was, Voskareth noted, a significant qualification that Cole delivered with no particular emphasis. The second question was about persistence. This was the one Voskareth had written and rewritten most. He had 7 different versions of it. He settled on the simplest: when the early settlements failed, and the records show they did fail, significantly and repeatedly, why did the colonists not leave? Cole picked up his coffee. Set it down. Picked it up again. We don't really have a good answer for that. Voskareth waited. I mean, I can tell you the historical reasons people gave at the time. Resource investment. Territorial claim. The cost of rerouting a colony ship. Cole turned his cup in his hands. But if you're asking why the people on the ground, in year 3 when the flooding took out the lower ring, or year 7 when the acid season killed half the crops, why they personally didn't pack up and go. Yes. I think it was mostly that nobody wanted to be the one who said it out loud. Cole looked at the maps on the wall. Once enough people stay through a bad thing, leaving starts to feel like a different kind of bad thing. Harder to explain. Harder to live with. Voskareth wrote this down under the subheading he had titled, Persistence as Species Pathology, and then looked at that subheading for a moment and changed it to Persistence, Cultural Mechanism. The third question was Dana's to answer. She joined them mid-morning, pulling up footage on a large screen at the end of the room, her field recordings from the past 2 years, cataloging the colony's relationship with the 2 largest apex predator species on Kale 9. The first species the colonists had named the crawlers, which was not scientifically accurate but was accurate in the way that mattered, which was that they crawled, and they were large enough that watching them did something unpleasant to the part of the brain that remembered being prey. 6 to 8 tons. 8 limbs. Ambush hunters with a territorial range of roughly 40 square kilometers. The cooperative survey data classified them as an extinction-level threat to any ground installation. The cooperative survey data was correct, for the first 12 years. We built around their territory edges, Dana said, pulling up an overlay map. Not in them. Around them. And we kept our activity patterns consistent, same routes, same times, same signals. We weren't unpredictable, so we weren't interesting. That is not a strategy, Voskareth said. That is an accident waiting for a different outcome. It worked. For how long? 40 years, consistently. Now look at this. She pulled up a video file. It opened on the colony's eastern yard, open ground, benches, a small garden area. A crawler was lying at the far edge of the yard, at the boundary where maintained ground met wild ground. Just lying there. Still. Its head was turned toward the yard but it was not moving. 2 small children were playing about 10 meters from it. Voskareth stared at the screen. They patrol now, Dana said. Not always. Not deliberately, as far as we can tell. But they move along the colony perimeter during certain weather cycles, and the smaller predators avoid those zones. She turned back to him. We didn't train them. We didn't feed them. We didn't do anything. We were just consistently here, and eventually that made us part of the pattern they operated around. They think we're weird, Dana added. But we're consistent. Voskareth looked at the footage of the crawler lying near the children. His translator flag lit up for a moment because his next thought was not translatable in under 12 words and most of those words did not exist in Galactic Standard. He composed himself. Consistent, he said. Consistent, she confirmed. He added a footnote to his notes. Humans have achieved nonviolent coexistence with Kale 9 megafauna through behavioral regularity rather than force. This was not planned. It is unclear if this makes it more or less impressive. After lunch, which Cole and Dana ate and Voskareth observed with polite interest, Cole walked him through the archive hall's main collection. 80 years of colony records, organized by year. Physical copies, because digital backups had been learned about the hard way during the electromagnetic storms of Year 11. Voskareth read slowly. Each entry was a record of something that went wrong and what was done about it. Year 3, flooding from a pressure ridge event destroyed the lower residential ring. Response, rebuilt 6 meters higher, added drainage channels into the geothermal system. Year 7, acid season produced soil pH that destroyed the grain crops. Response, began chemical treatment program and built the first greenhouse ring. Year 14, extended lightning cycle lasted 40 days. Response, new surge protection architecture, which was still in use in the current grid. After each disaster entry, after the gap of days or weeks where the response was being organized, there was always a line that said, resumed operations. Not recovered. Not rebuilt. Just, resumed operations. As if the disasters were interruptions, not endings. He reached year 22 and stopped. The entry was brief. An equipment failure in the deep shaft. 3 people lost before the shaft could be sealed. Below the entry, in a different hand, resumed operations. And then, below that, in the same second hand, added 2-person minimum to all deep shaft work. Never again. Voskareth stood at that page for a long time. Cole was watching him from the doorway. Not pushing. Just there. Every entry, Voskareth said, without turning around. Every failure. Every loss. And then it continues. Yeah. My species abandoned Kale 9 after the 3rd fleet. We classified it as unsurvivable and built a formal recommendation into cooperative law that no further resources be directed here. He closed the binder. The recommendation is still in effect. Cole said nothing. 3,000 cooperative beings died on this planet in less than a month. I know, Cole said. We found the wreck of one of your ships in Year 9. Out past the northern ridge. We marked it. A pause. You can visit it if you want. We kept it clean. Voskareth turned around. Cole's expression was not pitying. Not careful. Just level and honest, the way his face always was. My grandmother was here for Year 7, Cole said. The acid season. She lost the crops she'd spent 3 years building. Lost the greenhouse structure too. She spent the winter eating ration packs. He moved away from the doorway, starting back toward the reading room. She's 94 now. Grows tomatoes in greenhouse block C. They're terrible, honestly. Too much iron in the soil no matter what she does to it. He said it the way someone says a thing that is simply true. Voskareth thought about the woman who survived the unsurvivable planet's worst year and now grew terrible tomatoes in a pressurized greenhouse. He thought about this for the rest of the day. He kept thinking about it on the walk back to the visitor quarters. He kept thinking about it through the evening lightning cycle. He kept thinking about it while writing his report to the council, which kept coming out wrong, which kept not capturing the thing he was trying to say, which was not really a scientific thing at all. He filed the report. It was not his best work. He was already thinking about the next question on his list. Aliens were shocked to find humans thriving on the galaxy's deadliest planet. Part 4. The human diplomatic vessel was called the Hand of Callahan, which was not a name the cooperative's translation matrix handled well. Hand, translated fine. Callahan, translated as a proper noun of unknown origin, which the matrix flagged and Voskareth left unflagged because he had learned, over the past 2 weeks, that asking humans to explain their naming conventions led to long conversations that were interesting and not always useful. The ship was medium-sized and looked like it had been working for a while. Not run down, maintained, carefully maintained, the kind of ship where everything worked because someone had made sure it did. It sat in orbit 4 kilometers from the unbroken record and its commander had requested a meeting within 6 hours of arriving, which told Voskareth something about the commander before he had met her. Commander Nora Solis came aboard the unbroken record for the first session because Voskareth had suggested it and she had agreed without negotiating the venue, which also told him something. She was in her mid-40s, composed without being stiff, and had the particular stillness of someone who was paying complete attention to everything around her while appearing to pay attention to nothing in particular. Her second, a young lieutenant named Cal Obert, was doing his best to appear equally calm and achieving approximately 40% of it. Voskareth had read everything the cooperative had on human diplomatic history, which was not much, because the cooperative had not known humans existed long enough to have compiled a useful file. He had supplemented this with 4 days of conversation with Cole and Dana and Pete and 12 other residents of Rydell Ridge. He felt, going into the meeting, that he had a reasonable understanding of what humans wanted. He was half right. The cooperative's formal offer was standard. It had been used, in various forms, across 14 first contact situations. Mapping rights to Kale-9's mineral deposits, which were extraordinary, the sulfur-iron composition of the lower strata held concentrations of rare elements that would take a cooperative mining team a generation to fully extract. In exchange, full trade network access, medical technology transfer, complete star charts of cooperative explored space. It was a generous offer. 13 of the 14 species who had received versions of it had accepted within 2 sessions. Nora listened to the full presentation without interrupting. Cal took notes. When Voskareth finished, she set down her stylus and said, "We'd like to see the star charts first." Voskareth paused. "That is not, the charts are part of the exchange. They would be provided upon agreement, not before." "I understand that's your standard process," Nora said. "We'd like to see them first." He sent for them. He did this mostly because he was curious what she was going to do with them, and he had been curious about humans constantly for 2 weeks and saw no reason to stop now. She reviewed the charts with Cal for about 20 minutes. Voskareth watched her eyes move across the data, methodical, left to right, occasionally stopping, occasionally going back. She had a small pen that she turned between her fingers when she was thinking. She did not seem to be thinking about the trade network. She highlighted 6 systems. "These are flagged as uninhabitable," she said. "Correct. Hostile atmospheric conditions, unstable cores, 2 with high gravity designations. We want 3 of these included in the territorial discussion." Cal looked up from his notes. Seath, standing against the far wall, blinked all 3 sets of eyelids in sequence. Voskareth kept his expression even by considerable effort. "Those systems have no resource value," he said. "They cannot support cooperative infrastructure. They are essentially empty space with very bad weather." "Yes," Nora said. "You want the dead planets." "We want the planets nobody else will use." She said it the same way Pete had said, it wasn't that complicated, like a statement of obvious fact about the way things worked. As if choosing the planets everyone else had given up on was simply good sense. Voskareth looked at the 3 highlighted systems. One had an atmospheric sulfur content that nearly matched Kale-9. One had gravity at 1.8 standard. One had a 17-hour electromagnetic storm cycle. He thought about the archive hall. He thought about resumed operations. He wrote something in his notes, crossed it out, and wrote it again. The negotiation ran over 2 days. Nora was polite throughout. She was unhurried. She had a list and she went through it at a pace that was neither slow nor fast but was absolutely consistent, the same pace regardless of what Voskareth's side offered, regardless of what they adjusted, regardless of how the framing changed. Cal kept expecting something to shift her. Nothing shifted her. She was not making demands. She was describing what she needed, patiently, repeatedly, until it was agreed to. There was a difference. Voskareth understood the difference by the end of the first day. What humans needed, it turned out, was not what the cooperative had expected to be asked for. They wanted the 3 dead systems, which cost the cooperative nothing because nobody wanted them. They wanted the full medical transfer, which was standard. They wanted trade network access, which was also standard. And they wanted something that was not on the cooperative's standard offer list at all. They wanted human engineers placed on 6 cooperative outposts that were experiencing environmental instability problems. "Not military," Nora said. "Just engineers. And a geologist or 2. Those outposts are experiencing conditions that our own teams have not been able to stabilize," Voskareth said carefully. "Right," Nora said. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You want to fix them," he said. "We'd like to try," she said. The cooperative senior representative, attending via comm link from the council chamber, asked for a recess to discuss this addition. During the recess, Voskareth walked to the observation window and stood there looking at nothing in particular. Behind him, Cal Obert ate a ration bar he'd brought aboard and immediately appeared more functional. Seath organized his notes for the 12th time. When the session resumed, the cooperative agreed to the engineer placement on a trial basis. The final terms were, humans receive 3 uninhabitable systems for colonization research, full trade access, medical files, and the engineer placement authorization. The cooperative received mineral survey rights to Kale-9 and something they had not expected to receive, which was the presence of humans on their most troubled outposts. Nora signed the treaty copy without ceremony. She had a steady hand. The signature was clean. She said something quietly to Cal while capping her pen, too low for the translator to catch. Cal nodded. Whatever it was, it made the corner of his mouth move. Voskareth noted it in his records anyway. He had started noting everything. The reception afterward was informal. The colony had sent up a shuttle with food, and the humans ate it, and the cooperative delegation observed it, and Seath attempted to try something called a cracker and processed this experience privately for several minutes afterward. Cole had come up for the signing. He was not on the negotiating team, but Nora had asked him to be present as a colony representative, which seemed to please him in the specific way that things pleased Cole, which was that his expression changed by approximately 3% and he did not say anything about it. Before the reception ended, Seath pulled Voskareth aside and asked him, in quiet Ithali, what category humans were in the cooperative species classification system. Dominant, secondary, emergent, parallel. There were 12 categories. Every known species fit one. Voskareth looked across the room at Nora, who was talking with 2 cooperative representatives about outpost conditions in the 3rd of the flagged systems, already, with a notepad out. At Cole, who was explaining Rydell Ridge's drainage architecture to someone who had not asked. At Cal, who had found more food and was finally not vibrating. Settlers, Voskareth said. Seath waited for more. They are settlers. That is the only word that fits. They have always been settlers. He watched Nora make a note, tear it off, hand it to the cooperative representative. We thought we had no empty planets left. We were cataloging emptiness wrong. Seath blinked. What does that mean? Voskareth watched Cole answer a follow-up question about the drainage system with the patience of someone who had explained it 30 times and would explain it 30 more. It means, he said, that they were never going to stop finding places to go. We just never knew what kind of places they were looking for. He picked up his own notepad. He had more questions. Aliens were shocked to find humans thriving on the galaxy's deadliest planet. Part 5. 6 months after the treaty signing, Voskareth was still on Kale-9. He had told the council he was conducting an extended field study. This was true. He was also, though he had not put this in any report, simply not ready to leave. He had started noting the difference between those 2 things sometime around month 3 and had chosen not to examine it too closely. He wore a partial suit now. Not a full hazard rig, just the pressure layer and the filtration collar, no helmet. The first time he had stepped outside in partial suit, Cole had watched him from the doorway of the geology station with the careful attention of someone who would help if asked but was not going to say anything unless asked. Voskareth had stood in the open air of Kale-9 for 43 seconds before his instincts overrode his curiosity and he went back inside. The next day he lasted 3 minutes. By the end of the 2nd week he was doing his morning notes outside, sitting on the flat stone bench near the eastern gate, in the partial suit, in the regular Kale-9 air, watching the caldera rim catch the pale light of the planet's slow sunrise. He did not mention this in his reports either. Some things were harder to explain in scientific language. The first cooperative cultural exchange contingent arrived in month 4. 12 individuals, 4 species, full hazard suits. They came down from orbit in a clean new shuttle and stood at the eastern gate in a row, sealed and careful, while the colony went about its morning business around them. Dana was running the welcome orientation. She had a spreadsheet tracking bets on which species would be the first to try the partial suit outside. The Ithali contingent member, young, clearly curious, clearly trying not to show it, was the colony's current favorite. Pete had money on the second door high, who kept tilting their head at the open sky with an expression Voskareth recognized because he had made the same expression 6 months ago. He watched the orientation from the archive hall window. Dana walking. The exchange contingent following. 12 fully suited visitors moving through a city where the local children ran past them on their way to school. He had been one of those suited visitors 6 months ago. He looked at the stone bench where he now sat every morning without a helmet. He went back to his notes. The colony's rhythm had become familiar to him in the way that things become familiar when you stop watching them as a scientist and start just living near them. Storm cycle before dawn. The deep dark mid-morning when cloud cover thickened before the first pressure shift. Lightning season in the late afternoon, which most residents ignored unless they were working the outer structures. The specific sound the geothermal vents made on cold mornings, a low, even exhale that Voskareth had found alarming for the first 6 weeks and now found something like comforting. He had learned which predator movement patterns meant weather was coming. He had learned which section of the colony made the best coffee, which was greenhouse block B for reasons that Cole said had to do with the mineral content of the local water and Pete said had to do with the attitude of the person who ran it. He had learned that the crawlers moved earlier than usual before a pressure drop and that if you watched their direction you had about 4 hours of warning. He had put this in a report. The council had flagged it as anecdotal. Cole found him one evening on the northern ridge, a flat area above the city where you could see the full sweep of the caldera and, on clear nights, the nebula above the cloud layer. Voskareth had come up to review some survey readings and stayed because the view was difficult to leave. Cole sat next to him without being asked. They were quiet for a while. Below them, the city's lights were coming on in the early dark, warm and orderly, the same pattern every evening. A city that had been built in the wrong place by the wrong species and had simply refused to stop existing. She wants to meet you, Cole said. Voskareth knew who he meant. Cole had mentioned his grandmother 3 times over the past months, always briefly, always in passing, always with the same tone people use when they are working up to something. She heard about the visit records, Cole added. She's been following the exchange program. She said anyone who sticks around this long deserves a cup of tea. I cannot drink tea. I know. She knows. She's going to offer you one anyway because that's how she operates. He stood up. You can say no if you want. Voskareth thought about it for approximately 2 seconds. Tomorrow morning, he said. Greenhouse Block C was the farthest ring from the central heat vents, which made it the coolest section in the colony and the one most dependent on its own internal climate system. It was also the oldest active greenhouse structure, original construction, reinforced 3 times, the walls carrying the marks of 40 years of weather seasons and one very bad lightning strike in year 31 that had taken out the east panel and been repaired within a week. Ruth Rydell was 94 years old and approximately 5 feet tall, and she met them at the greenhouse door in a worn canvas apron with soil on both sleeves. She had Cole's same directness but warmer, the same habit of looking at you without softening it, but with something behind it that felt like long experience rather than long patience. She shook Voskareth's hand without hesitation. Cole says you ask good questions, she said. I have tried, Voskareth said. That's the main thing. She pushed the door open. Come in. Mind the lower tray rack. The greenhouse was warm and green and smelled like earth and water. Long rows of plants ran the length of the space, vegetables mostly, a few herbs along the south wall, and at the far end, a row of tomato plants that were doing what tomato plants apparently did on Kale 9, which was grow with great enthusiasm and produce fruit that tasted, according to Cole, like iron and mild regret. Ruth walked him through the rows. She talked about the soil treatment process, about the years it had taken to get the pH stable, about the strain of tomato she developed specifically for Kale 9's mineral profile over the course of 15 years of selective growing. She talked about this the way Pete talked about the drainage system and Cole talked about the geothermal shafts, with the deep, specific affection of someone who had made something work through patience and refused to be modest about it. At the end of the row she picked a tomato. It was round and red and entirely ordinary looking. She turned it in her hands once and held it out to him. I can't, he started. I know. You can hold it. He held it. It was smaller than he expected. Warm from the greenhouse light. Completely unremarkable. A tomato grown in chemically treated soil on a planet that for 200 years had been listed in cooperative law as a place where nothing could be grown, or built, or lived, or sustained. They're not great, Ruth said, with the satisfaction of someone who knew they were not great and was proud of them anyway. Too much iron. I've been trying to fix that for 12 years. Have you considered stopping? Voskareth said. She looked at him. No, she said simply. He thought about the archive hall. About resumed operations. About 31 names read from a soft-covered ledger. About Cole on the ridge, saying we just don't go, with no particular drama, like it was the only sensible answer to the question. May I take it with me, he said. When I go. You can have 2, she said. She picked another one and held both out. Cole said you're writing a big report. I want to be in it. You already are, he said. She seemed to find this acceptable. He wrote the final report on the last evening before departure, sitting on the flat stone bench at the eastern gate with the partial suit on and the KL-9 air moving slow and dry around him. The lightning cycle had finished an hour ago. The sky was doing its between storm thing, a strange amber color at the horizon, the clouds higher and thinner, the stars just visible where they burned through. He wrote for 4 hours. He did not delete anything this time. The report said what it needed to say, which was not about mineral rights or treaty terms or biological adaptation models. Those were in the appendices. The report itself was about what it meant that a species had found the galaxy's list of dead places and used it as directions. What it meant that the cooperative had spent 400 years cataloging limits, and humans had spent 80 years on one planet proving that the list of limits was shorter than the catalog suggested. He wrote that the 18 council members who had voted against first contact were afraid. He did not call them wrong for being afraid. He said they were operating from the same information the rest of the cooperative had always operated from, which was information about what could not survive. He wrote that the cooperative needed new categories. He did not know what those categories should be called. He put that in the report too. He had learned, over the past 6 months, that the most honest thing you could write in a report was what you did not yet understand. Cole was waiting at the gate when Voskareth came down from the ridge. Not to say goodbye in any elaborate way, just standing there, coffee in hand, in the amber pre-dawn light, looking at nothing in particular. They stood together for a moment. You'll come back, Cole said. It was not a question. Yes, Voskareth said. Cole nodded. That was the whole conversation. The shuttle lifted in the early morning, before the lightning cycle started. Below, Rydell Ridge shrank into its caldera, the rings of buildings, the greenhouse domes, the lights still on in some of the work structures where the night crew was finishing up. A city of 14,000 people on the deadliest planet in the galaxy, going about its ordinary day. Voskareth watched it until the cloud layer closed below him. He had 2 tomatoes in his field bag. They were, as Ruth had said, not great. He was going to keep them anyway.